The late summer sun burned low across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold. The air was thick with heat, cicadas humming in the distance. Mason Cole, 34, CEO of Cole Enterprises, loosened his tie as he steered his black sedan through a quiet suburban street. Beside him, his 7-year-old daughter Ava traced shapes on the fogged edge of her window, her cheeks flushed from the day's heat. "Daddy, why do people walk outside when it's this hot?" Ava asked, her voice small but curious. Mason glanced at her and smiled faintly. "Sometimes they don't have anywhere else to go." She thought about that for a moment. Then her tone sharpened. "Can we help somebody tonight?" Mason hesitated. After a day of endless meetings and a bitter phone call with investors, exhaustion pressed heavy on his chest. But Ava's gaze in the rearview mirror was earnest, and it pulled at him. The car rolled past the old courthouse steps when Ava suddenly sat upright. "Daddy, look!" Mason braked. There on the hot stone steps, a young woman knelt in a faded dress, clutching a small baby against her chest. Her dark hair clung to her damp forehead. Sweat streaked her face, but what made Mason's stomach twist was the baby's limp posture. Ava unbuckled before he could speak. "Daddy, her baby is freezing," she blurted, her voice cracking with panic. Mason stepped out, heat rising from the pavement like waves. The woman flinched as he approached. "I'm not here to hurt you," Mason said softly. "What's your name?" She swallowed hard. "Sophie." Mason nodded toward the baby. "And your child?" "Ella." Sophie's voice was hoarse. "She hasn't eaten since morning. We had to leave the shelter." Ava approached slowly, holding out her water bottle. "Here, it's cold." Sophie's eyes welled. She let Ava press the bottle into her hand. Mason's gut twisted as he watched Ella's tiny chest rise unevenly. He pulled off his suit jacket and draped it over Sophie's shoulders. "My car has AC," he said. "You both need to cool down." "Please let me help." Sophie hesitated, distrust flickering across her face. But Ella stirred weakly in her arms, and her choice was clear. Inside the sedan, cool air wrapped around them. Ava climbed in beside Sophie, her small hands gentle on Ella's back. "She feels so cold, Daddy," Ava whispered, fear etched into her tone despite the summer heat. Mason gripped the wheel, his pulse pounding. He drove toward the nearest urgent care, glancing back at the fragile bundle. His company's deals, the million-dollar contracts, none of it mattered now. At the clinic, nurses rushed Ella into an exam room. Sophie stood frozen by the doorway, Mason's jacket still around her. "You didn't have to stop," she whispered, voice breaking. Mason met her gaze. "I couldn't drive past." Ava slipped her small hand into Sophie's. "Don't cry. She's gonna be okay." Minutes later, a nurse returned, her expression soft. "The baby's stable. Dehydration and heat exhaustion, but she'll recover." Sophie pressed her palms to her face, shoulders shaking. Mason felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest, a pull he couldn't ignore. Outside, the sky darkened to deep amber. Ava leaned into Mason's arm. "Daddy, we found them." "That means we did the right thing, right?" Mason looked from Ava to Sophie, then through the clinic window at baby Ella. The world around him felt different, heavier. "Yes," he said quietly, "but this isn't the end. But this isn't the end." Mason's voice lingered in the small waiting room as Ava curled against his arm, her eyes wide. Sophie sat stiffly on the plastic chair across from them, Mason's jacket draped around her shoulders. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, but tension clung to the room like humidity. Sophie glanced at him, cautious. "We'll leave when Ella's cleared." "You don't have to stay." Mason shook his head. "I'm not leaving." Ava's small voice broke the quiet. "Mom would have stayed." Mason froze, her words slicing through the years he had tried to bury. He reached over and brushed Ava's hair back. "Yeah, she would have." The clinic door opened and a nurse smiled faintly. "She's stable now. A bit of formula, some fluids, and rest. But she shouldn't be out in this heat tonight." Sophie stood quickly. "Thank you. We'll figure it out." Mason rose. "Where will you go?" Her eyes dropped. "I don't know. The shelters are full. It's just for tonight. We'll be fine." Ava slipped off the chair and walked to Sophie. "Come with us," she said simply. Sophie's breath caught. "Sweetheart, I can't. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Mason said, his tone firm but gentle. He surprised even himself. "I have space. A spare room. At least until tomorrow." Sophie hesitated, but exhaustion weighed on her. The thought of stepping back into the night with Ella felt impossible. She nodded silently. The drive to Mason's home was quiet except for Ella's soft breaths. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo, the last streaks of sunlight fading. Mason's modern two-story house came into view, its windows glowing warmly. Inside, Ava led Sophie upstairs. "This was my mom's room," Ava said softly, pushing open a door. "It's nice. You can stay here." Sophie stepped inside, her bare feet sinking into the carpet. She laid Ella gently on the bed and smoothed the baby's hair. She whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know how to thank you." Mason stood in the doorway, his tie undone, his sleeves rolled. "You don't owe me thanks. Just let her get better." Later, after Ava was asleep, Mason found Sophie in the kitchen, staring at a framed photo on the wall. It was of Mason and Ava at a summer carnival, Ava holding a balloon, both of them smiling, carefree. "She's a beautiful girl," Sophie said quietly. "You're a good dad." Mason leaned against the counter, his voice low. "I try, losing Ava's mom. I promised I'd protect her no matter what." Sophie looked down. "I promised Ella the same, but promises are hard when you have nothing." He noticed the way her hand trembled as she gripped the counter. She wasn't just tired, she was on the edge. "You're not alone tonight," Mason said. "We'll figure something out tomorrow. Jobs, housing, something." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I'm not used to kindness anymore." The clock ticked past midnight. The house was still, the distant hum of cicadas filtering through the open window. A sudden cry from upstairs broke the quiet. Sophie rushed to Ella, lifting her gently. The baby's wail softened as Sophie rocked her, whispering soothing words. Mason stood in the doorway, watching the way Sophie's arms wrapped protectively around her child. Ava's sleepy voice floated from her room. "Daddy, are they okay?" Mason nodded, though she couldn't see him. "They're okay, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." As the night deepened, Mason lingered outside the guest room. Sophie sat on the bed, Ella asleep in her lap. For a moment, their eyes met across the darkened hallway. No words were needed. But Mason knew something had shifted. Tomorrow would bring questions and choices. Morning sunlight streamed through Mason's kitchen window, bright and sharp. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Ava sat at the counter, swinging her legs while eating cereal. Sophie stood nearby, cradling Ella, her hair still damp from a quick shower. She looked different in the daylight, less like a stranger, more like someone who belonged. Mason set a plate of toast on the table. "You should eat," he said. Sophie hesitated, then took a piece. "You've already done too much." Ava looked up from her bowl. "Daddy makes really good toast. You should try it." A faint smile flickered on Sophie's face. "It's perfect." They ate in a quiet rhythm, the clink of spoons and the soft hum of cicadas outside filling the room. But beneath the calm, questions pressed against Mason's mind. After breakfast, Mason stepped onto the porch, phone in hand. He scrolled through his contacts, considering which connections might help Sophie. Housing programs, employment offices, there had to be a way. Ava joined him, her small hand slipping into his. "She's scared," Ava said. "I know," Mason replied. "We'll help her." Inside, Sophie changed Ella's diaper on a clean towel Mason had laid out. She glanced around at the bright, spacious kitchen and the family photos on the walls. She felt out of place, but Ella's soft breathing against her shoulder anchored her. When Mason returned, Sophie spoke first. "We can't stay. I need to find work, somewhere to go." "You're not leaving today," Mason said firmly. "It's too hot and Ella needs rest. We'll start with small steps. Do you have any experience?" Sophie nodded slowly. "I worked as a receptionist before everything fell apart. I'm good with people." Mason's eyes softened. "Then we'll find something," Ava piped up. "She could work at Daddy's office." Mason chuckled. "Maybe, but the idea wasn't impossible." The day stretched on, heavy with heat. Mason called in to postpone meetings. He and Sophie took turns caring for Ella while Ava drew pictures at the kitchen table. For the first time in a long while, Mason's house felt alive, filled with voices and laughter that had been missing since his wife's passing. In the afternoon, a summer storm rolled in. Rain pounded against the windows and thunder cracked in the distance. Mason stood by the glass door watching the downpour. Sophie approached, holding Ella. "You're doing more for us than anyone ever has," she said softly. Mason turned, his expression unreadable. "It's what anyone should do." "Not everyone would," Sophie replied. The storm passed, leaving the air cool and damp. Mason helped Sophie carry Ella upstairs for a nap. He paused at the doorway, watching Sophie hum quietly to her baby. Something inside him shifted again, an ache he hadn't felt since the days when his own family was whole. Later, as evening settled in, Ava handed Sophie a drawing. It showed 4 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun: Ava, Mason, Sophie, and Ella. Above them, in wobbly letters, Ava had written, "Family." Sophie's breath caught. "This is beautiful, Ava," Ava grinned. "That's us." Sophie blinked back tears. She hadn't been part of anything called us in years. After Ava went to bed, Mason and Sophie sat on the porch. Crickets chirped, and the distant hum of cars filled the warm night air. "She's special," Sophie said, nodding toward Ava's window. "She keeps me grounded," Mason replied. "Even when I feel like I'm failing." Sophie turned to him. "You're not failing. You saved us." Mason looked at her, the porch light catching in his eyes. "I think you saved something in me too." For a moment, neither spoke. The night was still, the air thick with something unspoken. But Mason knew. Choices had to be made soon, but Mason knew. Choices had to be made soon. The next morning, golden light spilled across the porch as Mason watched Ava chase a butterfly through the yard. Sophie sat on the steps with Ella in her lap, her bare feet brushing the warm wood. For a fleeting second, the scene felt like a family snapshot he never expected to live again. Sophie broke the silence. "I should go. You've already done enough. I can't stay here forever." Mason turned to her, his voice steady but gentle. "I didn't ask for forever. I just don't want you walking out into nothing." She looked down, her fingers brushing Ella's tiny hand. "I've been nothing for so long, Mason. You and Ava. You reminded me what it feels like to matter." Ava bounded over, cheeks flushed from the sun. "Daddy, can they stay? Just for today?" Mason crouched to her level. "We'll talk about it, sweetheart." He glanced at Sophie. "Let's start by finding a way forward." After breakfast, Mason drove Sophie and Ella to a community center downtown. He had called a friend, Jenna, who managed a small outreach program. Jenna greeted them warmly, offering Sophie a list of job leads and temporary housing options. Sophie clutched the papers like they were lifelines. "I'll take anything," she said quietly. Jenna smiled. "You deserve more than anything. But this is a start." Back at Mason's house, Ava sat cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring another picture. This one showed a small house under a bright yellow sun. She wrote "home" at the top. When Sophie walked in, Ava held it up. "This is for you and Ella." Sophie's breath caught. She knelt beside Ava, hugging her tightly. "You're the sweetest girl I've ever met." As afternoon heat pressed against the windows, Mason offered to drive Sophie to see an available apartment. They rode in quiet, Ella asleep in her car seat. Sophie broke the silence. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." Mason kept his eyes on the road. "Because once someone did the same for me. After Ava's mom died, a stranger stepped in when I was falling apart. I don't forget things like that." Sophie stared out the window, her throat tight. The apartment was small and plain but clean. Sophie stepped inside, rocking Ella gently. She imagined a crib in the corner, a second-hand table by the window. It wasn't much, but it was hope. "I'll take it," she whispered. On the drive back, the late afternoon sky shifted to soft oranges and pinks. Ava dozed in the back seat, Ella stirring beside her. Sophie glanced at Mason, her voice almost a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me." Mason looked at her briefly, then back to the road. "You're hard to miss." That night, they shared one last dinner together. Ava chattered about school projects. Sophie fed Ella mashed vegetables. Mason watched the two of them, the sound of laughter filling spaces in his home he thought would stay empty forever. After Ava went to bed, Mason